So here we go. Here it is. It is Taron. That is what I've decided to recreate for some reason. I've certainly not made it easy for myself. I've never actually done a recreation in Planet Coaster either, so this is going to be an interesting one. But this is only the first episode, and as you will see, I have made the train design and the start of the layout of Taron. So let's get right into it. So the trains. We currently don't have an Intamin Blitz in Planet Coaster 2. I say currently because I guarantee that Frontier will release it in a DLC. But the only option, really, the closest option currently in the game is to use the Mack Hyper train, which is this one right here. And this is what started the whole thing, really. I wanted to see if I could build a Taron-like looking train on this Mack Hyper coaster, and this is what I came up with, and this is how I did it. The main thing, obviously, is these sort of horn shapes on the front, which I used these wooden right angle pieces because there are a very small amount of pieces in the game that you can actually scale right the way down to 10% and all the way up to 500%. I don't know why they're different from all the other pieces, and I wish all the pieces in the game could scale to that level, because limitations are what we don't really like as players. You know, we want to be able to scale things all the way down, like these barrels can scale all the way down to 10%. So you can have absolutely tiny barrels. And I think when you're doing something as finely detailed as the front carriage of a train, you need to be able to scale things all the way down, not just down to 50%. But yeah, I found these right angle cylindrical wooden pieces and figured out that I could make probably quite a good horn shape out of those. Unfortunately, I don't know if Frontier knows the definition of mirroring, but I can assure you that this is not how mirroring works. If I take this piece right here, for example, and turn on mirroring, that's not quite the mirroring we're looking for when it comes to building a symmetrical front carriage. So unfortunately, I did have to build both sides of the horn completely separately. This isn't mirrored. I had to do this twice and to get as close as possible to each other each time I did it. But I was quite happy with it. I think it looks alright. I wanted to make a custom sort of helmet shape for the front like Taron has, so I just used the smallest pieces possible I could find to make just something roughly that looks like what we're going for. And again, I wish I could scale these side pieces slightly smaller, but to be honest, I think they're alright. And this is kind of, to me, these squared off side pieces are what give the train that Intamin looking shape, because the Mack trains have no sides, really. There's no side at all, whereas the Intamin trains are very boxy in shape. I didn't actually build these trains to make a Taron recreation. I wanted to make a Taron inspired coaster, for example, but after making these trains, I just thought, you know what, let's just make Taron, why not? Okay then, let's jump into the build, and as you can see, I've already built the first launch track, station and brake run. This was just to basically gauge where I was going to start from, and I used Google Earth to measure how long the first launch track actually is, so that I could get at least the starting basis of length correct, because the launch tracks essentially define the full length of the ride. They go right through the center of the layout, both of them do. And yeah, as you can see, we're going into this first turnaround, overbank turn, which took a few tries to get right actually, and even right after I'd finished the whole layout it wasn't quite right, and I did some final tweaking on that afterwards. Something you'll see quite a lot of, which I knew about going into this, but I build the track and then I do loads of editing afterwards. Like I basically knew, seeing as we can't trace a layout, we can't import pictures to sort of basically trace where the track goes, like you could with recreations in Planet Coaster 1. I knew that I'd have to just build it by eye, and because with a ride like Taron, the placement of every track piece is essential to make the whole Tangled mess work. It's sort of like the Smiler, you know, it dips over and under itself all over the place, and it needs to be right where it goes. So I knew that I would just roughly place where the track goes, and on my right monitor I had a POV, the track level POV of Taron, constantly up on the screen to basically just sort of have a reference from the train's view, and then just build out the track where I think it goes. And then, as you can see, what I'm doing here is editing and pushing things out, bringing things in, you know, to essentially end up with the shaping that we're looking for. And I just honestly, when I kept saying it when I was building this, but I do not know how Intamin came up with this thing. It is just mental. I don't know how any human mind could come up with such a ridiculous layout, but I absolutely love it, and it's one of my favorite roller coasters in the world. It's currently not my number one anymore, but it did used to be my number one coaster, and it's still very high up on the list. As you can see here, I'm editing that airtime hill from earlier, and I do a lot of editing previous parts, because it's when you start getting to bits like this where it needs to come round and fit underneath itself. So here it needs to fit under the airtime hill and then go over the first launch, and obviously that's a very tight gap. And then later on we need to come back under this airtime hill, I think 2 or 3 more times. So there's just an absolute nest of track that needs to go under and over itself through these tiny little gaps. And as you see again, I'm editing that first overbank, which there the shaping is very wrong, but again I edit it again later on, so that's not even it done there. I will come back to that again later. And here we go into the little S-bend turns, which then has a full 180 turn into the second launch. And I thought it'd be really tough to make the second launch go dead straight, because obviously the brake run and both launches are completely parallel with each other. They're very, very straight. It's just the second launch is a little bit underground. But no, I managed to, with a little bit of tweaking, just get a very satisfying straight launch track that lines up with the other two. And off camera I did some like tests to make sure it's actually actually dead straight. But yeah, no, I'm really satisfied with that. The first, as you can see there, just pulled the POV onto that monitor for a second. That's what I was talking about though. I had that track level POV up the whole time to basically just look at the shaping of the track. And the shaping, by the way, is not there. What you're seeing me build is just getting the actual layout done, because once the layout's done, we can edit it afterwards. We can do all the shaping and stuff, but without anything to work off, then you're working with nothing essentially. So all I wanted to do first was get the track in roughly the right layout, and then we can edit it afterwards to get the shaping right. Speaking of shaping, this turnaround overbank after the second launch was so difficult to shape. Initially I was just sort of like thinking it just goes straight up and to the left, but it's actually harder to shape than I thought it would be. But after pushing it out a bit more and giving it a bit more sort of space to do that turn and that upward angle, then it came about quite nicely. And the second half of the layout is where I struggled quite a bit more, because this is where it comes back into the first half of the layout and has to weave through all of the track that I'd already built. So you could see there I was just pushing that corner out that I built earlier, because we needed that gap in order for this part of the track to come down and swoop up like around it. So again, I'm going to push this corner way out, so this gets pushed out here, and then in a second this corner here is going to get pushed way out again, and then we get slightly closer. We're sort of just making that space where the coaster's going to come underneath the first airtime hill. Again, like I was saying, it goes, so many pieces of track go under that airtime hill. It's crazy. So here we go. We're going to swoop down. And this, again, this was a really tough part to get right. This is probably one of the most photographed points of Taron, because from the pathway that goes through the centre of Klugheim, you get this really nice shot of it coming down and swooping through this sort of this turn that I'm currently building there. And I wanted it to be right, and it took a long time to get right. You can see I keep building and deleting and then building and deleting, and I think in the end I just sort of made a turn that, again, I wasn't too satisfied with, but I knew that once the rest of the layout's done, I can push it out and make the shaping right afterwards, which is what I do later on. And then we go into this overbank turn, probably the most inverted part of Taron, maybe. That speed sort of overbank where it goes beyond 90 degrees. Obviously Taron doesn't invert, it doesn't have any inversions, but this overbank does go beyond 90 degrees. So I guess it's the most inverted part of Taron. And again, you can see, look, I am just going back to all these previous parts that I've built to reshape them to fit new bits through. And slowly but surely you can see this tangled mess of a coaster coming together. But the most difficult part of this build is still yet to come, so just wait and see what that is. Here is something that I didn't realise that Taron even did, and I've been on Taron a lot of times, but I didn't realise that another airtime hill comes up right close to the first airtime hill and then sort of dives away from it. It's only when you, at least for me, it's only when I actually build the layout that I realise what this coaster actually does, because it is so complicated to look at that I didn't even realise what's going on with this coaster. But yeah, it brings another airtime hill up right next to the first airtime hill and sort of dives away from it, which is really interesting. Now obviously I'm using the Mack Hypertrain for this because there is no Intamin Blitz in Planet Coaster 2, at least yet. I know for a fact that I'm going to get well and truly into this build, and Frontier is probably going to spite me and do a Intamin Blitz DLC. I almost think it's guaranteed that we're going to get an Intamin Blitz DLC, at least in the future, because Intamin have been very vocal on their socials that they actually they're actually on board with the game. They like the game. They did on their Instagram, Intamin did some like Max stories and posts which were kind of funny, and obviously the highlight ride in the new game is the multi-dimension coaster, which is based on one of Intamin's roller coasters that they provide. So yeah, this Intamin is very heavily in Planet Coaster 2, and I just think it's almost guaranteed that the Intamin Blitz will come in a future DLC. It also makes sense as well, doesn't it, that Frontier would want to put a paywall behind a coaster that they know is so desired. As much as obviously that sounds really nasty and like, oh, it's just business, you know, they know what they're doing. They know that people want an Intamin Blitz in this game, so they know people are going to pay extra for it, which is sad, but true. Let's be honest, it just is true. Now we're going into the most difficult part of the entire thing, which is when Taron turns around and does these little airtime hills through the entire center of the layout. And the reason this is so difficult is because it dips and dives over and under itself multiple times. It has to fit into this gap underneath the two airtime hills earlier on, which, as you can see right now, there isn't a gap. And that's because I need to move some of the track that I've already built earlier on, so you're going to see me do that. But yes, this was the single hardest bit of the whole track layout build, was making this basically thread the needle all the way through the entire layout that I've already built. So you can see here I'm now opening up that gap where the train is gonna come through, and this is roughly where it enters its final turn into the brakes. So we're nearly at the end of the layout at this point. But yeah, of course Intamin would save the most difficult part until last, and that is literally just threading the needle through the entire layout, which is just mental. It's just such a crazy design. I don't know how Intamin even came up with this insane roller coaster, but it's just crazy. It's mental. But you can see I've opened up that gap now, and here comes the track, which I redo that. I think most things on this build I haven't stuck with the first edition of what I've built. Everything's been like built and then redone and then moved and then redone multiple times, and even after this time-lapse finishes, there is more track editing that needs to be done. That I think I'm gonna have to tinker with the track for quite a while until it's right on these sections, well, on the whole thing essentially. Possibly even into when I start doing the rock work and theming, you know, the track might have to take a little shuffle about as well for that. Who knows? But yeah, you can see starting that final bend into the final brakes, and once that is done, then it's just about reshaping, because there is so much reshaping that needs to happen to this thing. It's unbelievable. I started doing a basic smooth over at first, and it needs more than that. It needs a lot more than that. It's going to need a lot of reshaping, a lot of smoothing. But the main thing overall is that it is there. We have roughly Taron's layout, and with a bit of editing, a bit of smoothing, a bit of speed adjustment, we should hopefully have the base that is Taron as a roller coaster, and that is exciting. That's really good. It's basically the first hurdle in this massive project. I've been playing around with various different things to do the rock work in Klugheim, and I found this marble piece here, which I think will be the perfect piece to make a lot of the rock work in Klugheim. If it's sort of stacked on top of each other like this, that could accomplish the effect we're looking for a lot of Klugheim. So there we go. I hope you've enjoyed this first episode in recreating Taron. It's going to take a lot of work from this point now to start on that rock work and theming, but I'm really happy with how it's come out so far, and I think it's going to be a really cool project once it's complete. So stay tuned for episode 2 when that comes, and I hope you enjoyed the video.